Greetings and welcome to another video with Better Picks. Glad you could make it along. The video that I'm going to show today is the stitching process for panoramas in Bridge and Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop. Now you would have seen the previous video that I created around stitching a panorama, a horizontal panorama in Lightroom. It was using exactly the same images. So we're just going to go through the process of creating that panorama in Adobe Photoshop with a Bridge Adobe Camera Raw workflow. So as you can see, I've got the 4 images here in Bridge. You can see my previous video on Bridge and why I think it's such a fantastic tool for organizing all of your digital assets. If we select all 4 of those images, right click and open in a Camera Raw, there's a couple of ways you can go. Now, I've already made some adjustments, as you can see on the right hand side, to these images. I'm pretty happy with where they're at, just as a quick edit for the sake of demonstration. There's a couple of ways you can go. You can save them as a TIFF from here and then open those TIFF files in Photoshop. That's a great way to go. I've done it many times. It works really well. Or you can directly open those 4, once you've selected them, you can directly open those 4 images in Photoshop. That's the process that I'm going to go through today. Okay, so you can see it's opened those 4 images directly in Photoshop. Now, while I've opened them directly from a digital negative, it unfortunately won't give us the option to save as a digital negative, which normally when we're stitching, as I mentioned previously, with Lightroom, it creates a new file as a digital negative. Unfortunately, with Photoshop, you don't have that flexibility. So what that means is you stitch the images together and then you have to save it as either a PSD or a TIFF file. Now they are a non-compression file, you're not going to lose any quality. However, you're not going to have the flexibility to work on the stitched image that you would normally have with working with a digital negative or a raw file. So that's just something to keep in mind. Alright, so let's have a look at the process of stitching these images together. Firstly, I'm just going to pull them off so that they're all separate image files just floating in the Photoshop space. Then what I'm going to do is start to select each of the images and dragging them on top of a base layer. In this case, I'm going to use this one as the base layer and I'm going to drag this image across. Now, what you can do holding down the Shift key is just to click and drag, and that's going to line up the image directly on top perfectly, and then I can close that image. It's asking me, do I want to save this image because I haven't saved it previously out of Photoshop. In this case, I'm going to say no. Alright, just select the next image, click and drag across, and we're good to go. And no. And then the final image, shift and click and drag, and then close that final one, and that's fine to go. Alright, now that we have that image with the other layers on top, you can see on the layers panel down the bottom right here how we've got a background and then layer 1, 2 and 3, and that's just those other 3 images that I've clicked and dragged across on top of our base image. In order to be able to stitch this panorama together, the first thing that we need to do is turn that background into a layer, and it's really simple to do. All we do is double click and hit OK. Now it's been changed over to layer 0 as opposed to a background. The reason that's important is as a layer it can be moved around. As a background it's fixed, it can't be moved. Now obviously when we line up these images we need all the images to be able to move, so that's a really important part of the process. The next step is to select all 4 layers, so layer 0, 1, 2 and 3. Pop up here to edit on the top left hand side and go down to auto align layers. Now you have a new dialog box that pops up. My suggestion is to go through all of those and experiment with them to see the different results you get. Generally auto, the option that it defaults to, is pretty good. You get some good results out of that. But my recommendation, just as a testing so you know what it does, is to go through each of those options and try them out. Perspective, collage, reposition, spherical and cylindrical. For the way that I shoot and my workflow, I've always found cylindrical to be the best option. However, as I mentioned, I would definitely recommend testing out those other ones to see if the results that you get are the results that you're after. We're going to use cylindrical today. As I said, that's the one that I normally use. And I'm going to hit OK. It's now going to go through a process of aligning those different layers and joining that panorama together. And let's just zoom out, and you can see that the images have been warped and roughly aligned so that they're all sitting next to each other. Now you can see that they're still separate layers and there's very clear joins. That's because in Photoshop we need to go through a couple of extra steps to make everything happen. So what we're now going to go down to is what's called auto blend, and what that does is apply a mask to the images, and it looks for the path of least resistance, the path on the images of where they will join up in the most seamless way. So let's click on that one, and again we're doing panoramas. There we go. Now we can see that that has stitched together pretty seamlessly. You can also see down on the bottom right hand corner in the layers dialog box that those masks have been applied, and those masks have been are only showing the sections where the path of least resistance, as I mentioned, to basically allow those images to be stitched together seamlessly. It's looking for the section where it will come together with no issues, and it's done a perfect job. If we zoom right in on that image, we can see that we've got some beautiful detail there, and there doesn't appear to be any obvious joins at all, which is never a bad thing. You can also see that it's created an extra layer, layer 3, merged, and that's basically the layer of everything joined together. Now you can see there's the little marching ants of the outline of the original images, and it's actually done a great job of filling in those extra areas as well. If I get rid of those marching ants, you can see we've got a beautiful big panorama now, all stitched together. Now, being a layered image, I'm going to save this. I'm going to keep the layers intact, just so that I've got a little bit of flexibility, so I can do, a little bit of fine investigation in the future. The reason I say that is, say for example, if I wanted to print this up to a 2 or 3 meter wide panorama, I want to really make sure that I'm checking the detail. So keeping those layers intact will give me a little bit more flexibility. So if I go to Save As, you can see it defaults to PSD, and that's because the image is a layered image. So I'm going to save that, and we now have a PSD to work with. Last step in the process, I'm just going to have a look at the image size, and you can see that this is 11,166 pixels by 3,752. That is a massive file. It's the equivalent of 119 megapixel, which when you think about it is pretty impressive out of a 20 megapixel drone. The detail that would be captured and available for us to use, as you can see, is quite amazing. It is a very, very detailed image, and this would print beautifully at any large size with complete flexibility. So that's definitely the advantage of creating panoramas, the large files that you end up with and the complete flexibility you have in printing, as well as the flexibility you have to create different shaped images, whether it's a horizontal or a vertical panorama. Hope you've enjoyed this video and look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.